Between the hills, the stars, the sky, the river so clear, river so clear.
Let us join in a spirit of meditation, reflection, or prayer as we deepen into our service and share our opening words for this morning. An excerpt, it says an expert, so I got confused there. An excerpt from the book, The Road to Character by, appropriately, journalist David Brooks. Good, wise hearts are obtained through lifetimes of diligent effort to dig deeply within and heal lifetimes of scars. You can't teach it or email it or tweet it. It has to be discovered within the depths of one's own heart when a person is finally ready to go looking for it and not before. The job of the wise person is to swallow the frustration and just go on setting an example of caring and digging and diligence in their own lives. So that brings us to our program today. And our program is called Ditch the Miss and Dis. Information Needs No Prefix with Steve Andrist. And I know many of you know Steve. His reputation precedes him in many ways, but he is, according to this, these are the official things, he is the co-chair of the North Dakota News Cooperative. He's a third-generation newspaper owner who retired in 2020 from 7 years as executive director of the North Dakota Newspaper Association. He was the owner of the Journal at Crosby and the Tioga Tribune, and he was inducted into the NDNA Newspaper Hall of Fame in 2021. Today, Steve is going to discuss the prevalence of misinformation and disinformation, how to identify them and find trusted sources of information.
All over America and across North Dakota, a crisis is brewing.
We know newsrooms are shrinking. We know that reporters have multiple deadlines and more responsibilities than ever before.
The traditional media became less and less able to provide journalism because their revenues weren't sufficient to do that.
According to the Associated Press, every week 2 local newsrooms disappear, and those newsrooms that survive shrink.
Just yesterday, I was over at the Capitol. I mean, there's so many bills and things like that being proposed. But I think there were only 3 journalists in the media room at the time.
We have 1 reporter in Crosby. We have 1 reporter in Tioga. In our town, when there is something that needs delving into, there needs to be an investigative piece done on something, we don't have enough bodies to do in-depth reporting.
As a result, news deserts are growing. 70 million Americans live in a county with 1 newsroom or none at all. And as newsrooms shrink, our communities change.
Well, we all have a county government, we all have a city government, we nearly all have a school board. We have all these layers of local government that are supposed to be working for the people. And if there is no public watchdog over these entities, study after study has shown that you begin to see corruption, you begin to see a lack of engagement in the community, you see fewer candidates.
And misinformation spreads. A 2019 poll of 25,000 people found 86% of those who believed they'd been exposed to deliberately misleading content fell for it.
The age we live in right now, it's so easy for people to share on social media. No matter what the social media platform is, they read something they like and they click, oh, okay, click share. I'm going to send this to everybody else. Unfortunately, they don't always check to see whether it's accurate or true. I mean, we know that other countries have attempted to provide information to us when we're making decisions about things like who we're going to elect for office.
As an educator, again, I keep coming back to pushing students, pushing young people. Check, check. How do you know they're telling the truth? There has to be that verification process.
The need for reliable, relevant, real news is greater than ever. Enter the North Dakota News Cooperative, a new nonprofit organization with a 2-fold mission.
The first mission, and the one we are actively engaged in already, is to provide journalism in North Dakota, about North Dakota, to North Dakotans.
We want to try to find stories that have an interest to all North Dakotans. I mean, it's not usually a specific happening in one area or another. It's something that's affecting everyone.
The name cooperative is very apt because hopefully over time, it will be a cooperation in that if I'm a small town newspaper publisher and I have kind of a big nut of a story to crack, and I don't have the resources to crack it, and I also know that it may apply to a lot of other small towns, I'm going to call Michael and say, I got a story for you.
I like context in my stories. I like multiple sources. I like to know that my stories are vetted. I like to know that they're edited. And as the North Dakota News Cooperative, those are things that we all agree upon and hold as foundational.
The North Dakota News Cooperative to me is just, it's timely. It's really important right now, particularly as an educator, but just as a citizen. Who do we trust?
And as the North Dakota News Cooperative injects our communities with local journalism, our second mission is underway to advance news literacy across the state.
Commentary is good. Opinion is good and it's important, but it's not fact. And fact can't be changed, no matter what your opinion is. So knowing the difference between fact and opinion is pretty important.
That differentiation about opinions versus storytelling, factual storytelling, history, and all of that, they're all interrelated, but they have to be rooted in a foundation of an educational process. Oh, I know this to be true because da 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 da, whatever that is.
The work of the North Dakota News Cooperative has begun, and with private and public support, we'll build a stronger North Dakota with vital communities, informed citizens, and stories that matter.
I mean, everybody in the news business, or I guess in the newspaper business anyway, is saying that we have to foster the idea or the notion that good news is worth paying for. But that goes hand in hand with teaching people the difference between good news and not so good news.
Maybe it says I grow older, but these are things that I see as extremely important, and I want my kids and grandkids to be able to trust news.
There are so many wonderful stories in North Dakota to help uncover those things, and talking about ourselves and who we are and the positiveness of being North Dakotans together and cooperatively, and I see that as a core part of what the cooperative is doing and is going to continue to do.
The North Dakota News Cooperative. Reliable, relevant, real. To learn more and donate, visit newscoopnd.org.
First, I want to just introduce who we are and what we're doing. Nonprofit journalism is a trend across the country. It's growing faster than for-profit journalism is, and the reason is for-profit journalism has been impacted so significantly by loss of revenues to digital sources, not necessarily sources that do journalism. They send information out there, but they leave it up to us to decide if it's true, if it's not true, if it's a fact, if it's an opinion, what the case is. So newspapers and other traditional media that provided journalism lost a lot of revenues, and the result of that was they lost a lot of journalists, a lot of reporters. And that's a bad thing for communities. It's a bad thing for the state. It's a bad thing for the country. Because if it's other sources, you have to decide for yourself, is it mis, is it dis, or is it information? There are ways you can decide, and we'll go through a little bit of that. But we decided that several people that mostly had been involved in the newspaper industry in North Dakota, that we needed to do something about the decline in journalism. And so we set about forming a nonprofit. We have one reporter now in our nonprofit. We are newspaper people who are really bad at fundraising, but we're trying. We've got funds in hand, I think, to go for at least another year, so that's promising. In the meantime, you've probably also heard of North Dakota Monitor. It's another nonprofit who I was a little leery about at the beginning because I hoped that we wouldn't have somebody that would be just doing the same thing as others were already doing. But I think they've showed a lot of promise, and we're happy to be in the same space as they are here. Also, there's Buffalo's Fire, is a native-based nonprofit in North Dakota. Jody Spotted Bear is a publisher of that one. And so in a state where, 4 years ago, there were none, there are now 3 nonprofits trying to do this work. And I think it's good for us. One of the things we've learned through national research is that when a community loses its source of local news, that's not all it loses. It loses some economy, some employment, which isn't even the biggest thing. It also loses civic engagement. Fewer people run for public office. Fewer people trust the people who are in public office. And for good reason, because when there is no local news that's providing that sort of watchdog service in the community, local governments or different types of governments do tend to take some chances and maybe do some things that they wouldn't do if somebody else was watching. So that's kind of the premise on which we started. And we're having fun with it. It's a good retirement gig. My wife wouldn't always say so, but it's been a lot of fun. And one of the reasons is you can see what's happening. You can see some of the fruits of your labors. Our stories have been primarily used in newspapers around the state, but we're expanding that now to include more of a digital presence. Next week or this week now we'll be having a more sophisticated website, which again is kind of a challenge for people who are used to using typewriters or computer terminals. But it's how people get information these days, and the information that we're providing is the important thing. That's really the key. Disinformation, I guess we would define as the type of information, you can't say fact, but it's the type of information that's deliberately disseminated in order to create a point of view or to advocate for a point of view that's not necessarily a factual point of view. Misinformation basically is false. It's just false information that people don't know is false. Rumors, insults, sometimes pranks, like the guy who tipped over the construction outhouse in our driveway the other day. Lots of pranksters out there. But we know also that clicks are really important somehow. I don't understand the technology, but clickbait is a big deal. Just a couple years ago, there was a story out in southwestern North Dakota that reported on a family who had been in a car accident by killdeer, and 3 children and a mother had died in this car accident. And the reporter at the Dickinson Press started to look for that information because they hadn't had it in the Dickinson Press. And as she got further and further into it, she found the same story in different places, in different states across the country. And I can't tell you who it was that wanted that clickbait or what they were getting out of it, but the whole point of it was to spread some information that would get people to read what's there and to get somebody to know that that email address or that URL that you're coming from is correct so that they can use it for other things. That's disinformation. We know the last presidential election cycle, there's disagreement on who's responsible, but we know that Russian technology centers were busy sending out social media messages that would impact or designed to impact our election in one way or another. And we know politicians sometimes don't tell the whole story. They only tell part of the story. So how journalism differs from that is that, at least in theory, the basics of journalism include multiple sourced information. It's not just one source. It's vetted. In other words, it's fact checked usually in some way or another, compared with different sources, and it's edited. So hopefully most of the typos have been fixed, which you don't always find in disinformation or misinformation. That's one of the keys of identifying it, if there's a lot of typos or spelling mistakes and that sort of thing. I think typically your local news providers are pretty reliable. We don't always agree with what they say. We don't always agree with their opinions. We do need to keep opinion pages separate from news pages. But by and large, I think most of them can be entrusted. And that is the key, I think, in these times, is for people to find trusted sources of information. Doesn't always have to be the same one, but identify what you believe or something you believe is true, a source that you believe is true. It might be the New York Times, it might be Bloomberg, it might be whoever, but you can tell by the byline stories. A lot of times disinformation has no bylines, or it has made up bylines. And by the way, if you've ever heard of organizations like Snopes or factcheck.org, or there's a whole bunch of different sites where you can go if you have any suspicion at all to determine. One of them has more than likely researched I was going to say fact, but a piece of information, and I'd be able to identify whether it's fact or not. Long-held organizations like the Bismarck Tribune, like Seattle Times, any type of organization is generally trusted, I think. But it's very, very easy for someone, and AI in this respect scares me even more. It's very easy for someone to create something that looks very legitimate. It looks a lot like the Bismarck Tribune or the Minneapolis Star Tribune or whatever type of media you trust. And so the problem that we ran into is that, or that all of us ran into, is that in social media, it's just easy to be in your echo chamber, see something that resonates with you, you read something that resonates with you and click the share button or the like button and send it to all kinds of other people. Unfortunately, we now have, I think, personal individual responsibility before we do that to check. I mean, you wouldn't want to go to someone's house and meet with a group of people and state something as fact if you didn't know it was fact. But that's what we all do all the time on social media. And it's kind of easy to do because you're sort of anonymous with it. Not totally, but it's not like you're talking to someone face to face. It's easy just to say, click that, and it's gone, and you're done with. So find publications that you trust. They can be digital or print or electronic or whatever. Find names that you trust. David Brooks. I wish I had the eloquence and thoughtfulness of David Brooks, but we don't all have it. If there are a lot of mistakes, spelling, grammar, that's a red flag. If story reports sources who were unavailable or declined to comment, that's an indicator of journalism-related ethics, because you know that somebody at least tried to get a hold of somebody else. Misinformation and disinformation mostly look for one source or quote one source, maybe a made-up source, and that's it. So if you have different perspectives or points of view in a story, that's really important. News literacy is the term that we use for knowing the difference between what is trusted information and what is misinformation or disinformation. When we talk about multiple sources, we're talking about, we talked to the governor, but also to somebody from the opposite party, for example, or somebody on a different side. You talk to the pipeline company, but you also talk to the Sierra Club or somebody else. So those sources there could be some perspective that you would get in background from other published sources, especially like studies or something that's been determined to be the case. But no, we're talking about talking to people, talking to different people, not reporting what somebody else. It's kind of frustrating because sometimes even good reporters take shortcuts.
In my role at AARP, I'm lucky to be able to work with the North Dakota News Cooperative and with the North Dakota Monitor, as we provide, the AARP has a lot of sources of information as well as some expertise. And so it's been great. And one of the things that I've seen about Michael's stories is they're really, I don't want to say evergreen because I know they're not evergreen, but I track all the news, and that, like his story about long-term care, it showed up in April, and I think he did it back in the fall. And so it's just, and I see it filling in these newspapers, and I'm curious if they're seeing a rise in readership or subscriptions because there's more news coming from these organizations, which is wonderful for these, short-staffed local papers. Do you have any statistics about if readership or trust or any of that is happening, or are you planning to measure that?
I don't have the numbers with me, but I know the Newspaper Association does keep the circulation numbers. And circulation in North Dakota, newspaper readership in North Dakota is declining, but primarily because of the loss of newspapers and publications. Readership is really actually quite strong. And one thing that's been very encouraging to me is every time I've gone to a group to speak, we find people who understand why this is important, and they're kind of kindred spirits in that way. So I am very optimistic about the future of newspapers and of other types of media. Print newspapers are going to continue to go away, and which is fine as long as the journalism they provide continues and the information that they provide continues. That's the key. It's a hard thing for a guy who grew up in a print shop to admit that print is on its way out. But, print requires paper, ink, electricity, distribution, fighting with the Postal Service, and all kinds of things like that. Digital, click, and it's available to anybody who wants to look for it. So one of the things we're doing now at the News Co-op is trying to establish more of an ability to have subscribers, in the sense that it's people who want to see what it is we're doing. Not that they're necessarily paying for that, but that they're signing up to get it in their inbox or whatever. And that's, I wish I did have ways to quantify it, but at this point I don't.
I have a question about, you had talked about how nonprofit news organizations are, at least in North Dakota, are on the rise and sort of filling in where the more traditional publications have dropped off. Is that a trend that you're seeing other places as well? And can you just talk more about that? How do you think that's changing, or sort of what direction does that mean that where we're headed?
Yeah. I wish it wasn't the case, but I think in the long run, it's a good thing. And it is a trend everywhere. I have a friend in New Jersey whose family has been longtime newspaper publishers, like my family has been. And I think they had 10 or 12 different newspapers in the Rhode Island, New Jersey area. And they decided to take the whole company nonprofit. So this is a for-profit business that went nonprofit. The reason is primarily advertising. The old business model for disseminating news is selling advertising so that you can write news and information and disseminate it to people. Advertising has now gone to Google and Facebook and all those different places. Even in smaller towns, it's starting to come. People might still advertise in their paper, but they're likely more to say, here's my information, get the details on my Facebook page or on my website or something like that. So that business model is not working anymore. It's like a lot of things, it takes a little longer to change in North Dakota. But just as an example, we belong to an organization called the Institute for Nonprofit News. It's basically a trade association for nonprofit news organizations. And I think there are something like 1,700 members of that organization nationally. So that's, to me, a good indication of the growth of nonprofit.
What kinds of things are there that's being done or considered in order to increase the distribution? And one of the things I think that's really troubling or difficult to overcome is the silos people are in, and so they're almost, it's really hard to get through to people who have differences in opinion. So do you have any thoughts on what can be done and maybe what we can do to help break down some of those silos with good information?
Sure. Well, silos are really good, but only for corn. And as I mentioned, you know, I'm an old-time newspaper print guy, so I don't really personally understand the digital systems very well. But we do know that they've been well established by others, so they're easy to copy or pattern yourself after. And the Institute for Nonprofit News is one group that helps all of us learn that sort of thing a little bit. And we're just now getting to that point where we should this week have the capability of getting newsletters to people on a regular basis. Our process is a little bit different from most others. We're trying to do more deep dive stories. We kind of like to say that we're not breaking any stories, but we're explaining to you why the stories that someone else broke are important. And so consequently, we don't do as much content as others do, maybe 3 stories a month, even maybe 3 or 4 stories a month. But you're right, we need to find better ways to distribute it. And you can help by sharing what we have, or sharing our link, or telling people about our website. When you read something we like, post it somehow. Refer them to our website. We're at newscoopnd.org. newscoopnd.org. We're hoping to grow and spread the word to anybody who will listen and understand why it is that journalism is more important than social media.
So these are words from Michael Collins. Changes abound. Changes abound around us, within us, between us and our communities, our neighborhoods, and our beloved faith communities. Changes abound. May we each find the balance point we need as we move through our ever-changing world. The balance between the old and the new, between the known and the unknown, between the familiar and the perhaps bold and risky, between the familiar and the perhaps bold and risky possibilities that may be there waiting.